Can we give me a little credit for not saying anything about his voice on this episode? I really think I took a lot of restraint, and I think I need some props for that.
Did you put like a Post-it like right on the screen?
I did. It's right on the screen right here. It says, "Don't be a dick about his voice."
Welcome to another week of 1001 Album Complaints, the podcast where lifelong musicians and old friends pick an album from Robert Dimery's list of 1001 albums you must hear before you die to listen to all week, analyze, talk a little crap on, and ultimately vote whether or not you needed to hear this album before you perished. This week, we've been listening to Bob Dylan's Bringing It All Back Home. Very, very excited to get into this one. I have a feeling it's going to be a contentious episode based on the faces I'm looking at.
Wait, Rob, I'm going to guess you hated this album, right, Rob? This is one of your worst. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll compare SAT scores at the end, too, so you, the listener, can decide.
Ow. Ouch.
So,
music for the formative years.
You should also add penis size to that comparison. Right. just so we can really close all the cases once and for all.
Okay, but before we get into Bob, lovely Bob, which I'm excited about, and we do our introductions, I wanted to bring up a quick bit of listener mail. Keep in mind that if you like what you're hearing, folks, if you're listening for the first time, or if you're an old hand at this, listening to us gab about albums, we would love to hear from you. You can write us an email with your complaint, your correction at 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com, or you can shoot us over a review on your various podcast services. We really appreciate it. It helps us get the word out. So today we have some listener mail. Listener Carlos writes in, "Hey dudes, great show. I always learn something by listening to you, so keep up the good work. I was just listening to the Tusk episode and I nearly dropped my Microsoft Zune podcast player. When I heard Phil call Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except for Me and My Monkey a late night Paul experimental track, and Adam just let it pass by.
Oh,
that track is so quintessentially John Lennon, lyrically,
so John
sonically,
Lennon.
etc. Adam's
Which
Beatles
song am I
cred.
thinking of that?
Adam's Beatles cred is in serious jeopardy here.
I may have just zoned out because, I don't know, maybe there was a monologue going on that I just lost interest in.
Listening
Sorry,
to
Phil,
your
I love
oldest
you.
and dearest friends for an hour is
just
pretty
drowning
challenging. I agree.
Guys. So, I mean, I'll take that one. I mean, obviously, even nobody bats 1,000. So it's just I'm at like 997 now.
Oh yeah, yes, that's what you're batting, Phil. 997.
Anyway, he closes by saying, seriously though, love you guys. Please continue to complain about Clapton. Not enough people realize what a piece of garbage that guy is.
Carlos, you're my people. Thank you.
Adam, what song am I thinking of there? There is a McCartney song that's all him, right?
I mean,
Maybe
that
it's Why Don't We Do It in the Road? One of those is like a...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. What White Album? Yeah. I thought you meant solo. That feels like that might be. Yeah. It's him just hitting his hand on his lap for the drums, I think.
You guys are just digging yourselves an even deeper grave here.
You're right. I should just stop. Rob, if you're editing this, let's take it back and make us all sound genius.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'll put on the Genius auto-tune filter.
Yeah.
And I might want to leave that on for the rest of this episode, as previously mentioned. So... we are talking about Bob Dylan's 1965 release, Bringing It All Back Home. I just want to set the scene and then play a song real quick, and then I want to get your reactions to it. Bob Dylan, leader of the folk movement. Imagine, this is 1965. I think we have a tendency to conflate the late 60s or the entire 60s with the late 60s. But in this time, music was quite square, I assure you. The Beatles had put out Hard Day's Night, but they were still a good year before recording Rubber Soul. And here you are, a hep cat wearing a turtleneck in Greenwich Village, and you are very self-important and you think you're pretty cool and pretty smart and pretty politically minded, and you love Bob Dylan for songs like Blowin' in the Wind and Masters of War. And the new Bob Dylan record drops, and you put on the turntable, and the first song is Subterranean, and you're confused. As maybe everyone on this call was, but I think that is the setting for what we have here. So I'm going to kick it around the room. I want to hear people's tweet-length impressions of this record. and their introductions. We're going to kick it to Tom first.
All right, thanks everybody. This is Tom. Yeah, it was hard to put a tweet-length review for this album together, mostly because, I mean, this is just, it's like a snapshot of an extraordinarily productive time in the life of one of the best lyric writers of all time, but he's moving into a different style of lyric writing, a little bit more of that sort of stream of consciousness style. I gotta say, he mostly hits home runs, but there are definitely a few notable exceptions. I think that I judge this album a little bit more harshly than I should because people have the tendency to want to read into everything and try to find these deeper meanings in Bob Dylan songs. Like everything he says has to be this sort of prophetic, really point. And it's like some of these are just like word salad nonsense. And I still really like them. I like the word salad nonsense. It works, but I take issue maybe with that. There's this super deep meaning to Subterranean Homesick Blues or something like that, which is like, hey man, the guy could just be spitting nonsense and having fun. There's nothing wrong with that. That was way more than a tweet length review, but that's where I came in.
Fair enough. We're going to revisit that topic. I'm excited to get in deeper into that one, Tom, because I think I mostly agree with you on that. Adam, let's throw it to you.
Sure. Hey, this is Adam. Current mood? Unimpressed.
Oh, this is gonna get chippy.
That's my tweet.
This is gonna get real. This is gonna get real chippy. Sorry. Be prepared to be told you're wrong by Rob for like an hour and a half straight.
Nothing new there, right?
I'm ready. I'm prepared.
Phil, let's hear from you.
My tweet length review is Adam is wrong and his ears need tuning.
Just like a couple of the guitars on this album as well.
Faux show.
No time for tuning, Adam. No time.
No. We have 3 days. Go. Hey.
Okay, this is Rob here, and my tweet length review is Bob Dylan invents rap music. There, I said it. No, I'm just joking.
I have a note.
I'm just joking. I'm just joking about that. My real tweet length review is this is a songwriter's record, so it has to be taken as such. There happens to be a band in the room sometimes, but that aspect is more important culturally than sonically. The focus here, I think, and the focus of our conversation is going to be about breaking down pointless boundaries, including the ones that Bob Dylan had set up for himself, with a side dish of trying to annoy the hell out of the Hep Cats. You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows.
So, Rob, I'm going to correct you on this one here. As much as I do like Bob Dylan, I like his lyrical style, I think that you have to credit the birth of rap music with a band called the Jubilaires that came out in the 40s and 50s. If anybody has the opportunity to listen to like some Jubilaires stuff, listen to this song called Noah. You can go back and listen to. It is totally like you just put a beat behind it, and it's like a modern rap song, but it's like a bunch of like, black dudes in suits doing lots of like hum 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 background while one guy's doing like a nice like kind of scat singing over it. Just check that out.
Interesting. Yeah, I will check that out. Well, to be clear, and we can just roll right into it. I totally was joking because even Bob Dylan would freely admit that something like Subterranean Homesick Blues or this cadence of songwriting was very much based on the work of Chuck Berry, specifically a Chuck Berry song called Too Much Monkey Business, which interestingly I was into. I feel like I haven't listened to Chuck Berry now in about 30 years, but when I was a very young man, I listened to a bunch of Chuck Berry for some reason. Maybe it was the influence of the film Back to the Future. I'm not really sure. But Too Much Monkey Business is a great tune.
You were just trying to get invited to all the cool parties by being like, hey, guys, you a fan of Memphis? Yeah, it's a great song.
Okay. So, all right, well, so let's just get into it. A little bit of background on Bob, although with such a storied career, I do want to really try to keep the focus on just what was going on with this record, right? So I'll try to ground it. But just for your FYI, he was born with a different name. His real name is Robert Zimmerman. He adopted the name Dylan based on just wanting to have a stage name, partially, and to obscure his background, which you're going to see is kind of a theme with him. He does not like to explain himself, whether in interviews, and this has been consistent throughout his life. He likes to keep mystery. The goal of his lyric writing is the same. He's from middle-class Jewish parents in Hibbing, Minnesota. So he is, I can confidently say, the best musician to ever come from Minnesota, bar none. Confidently.
Boosh.
Step aside, Husker
Waiting
Du.
for the listener mail. Waiting for the listener mail there.
And I think it's worth mentioning that this record is still a little bit pre-rock and roll Bob. So I agree. You're seeing a time of transition, and there are a few caveats to how this was made. but it was the first time that he put any electric instruments, or really any other instruments other than himself and his acoustic guitar and his harmonica, on a record. He'd already had a good amount of success with just him and that acoustic guitar and that harmonica clipped in front of his mouth, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So this was really experimentation for him, and it really pissed his fans off. You'll hear these stories about Bob Dylan going to the Newport, Rhode Island Folk Festival, this big folk festival that had helped make him earlier in his career. Now, admittedly, we're talking about like 3 years before all this happened. Everything happened quickly in the 60s, I always find. People made records quickly. Fame came and went very quickly. But anyway, the Newport Folk Festival, which had made him, he returned this summer after this was released in 1965 with an electric band, and he was booed, I think, continually for like the first several songs. People were very shocked and not into it. And there's actually a scene in that Martin Scorsese documentary called No Direction Home. He's up there with the band, by the way, meaning Levon Helm and Rick Danko and company. And I think he gets booed all through the first song, which is Maggie's Farm. And then in the little song break, somebody yells out Judas at him. And he just and he turns around to the band and he says, "Play it fucking loud." And then they launch into Like a Rolling Stone. So that gives you a little sense of his attitude towards that, but he was getting booed pretty harshly.
I've got to admit, if somebody called me Judas from the crowd, I would definitely take that as that would definitely motivate me.
We're doing this. Yeah, we're doing
totally.
this. Let's go, boys.
Yeah.
It reminds me just slightly, we always have to wrap it back to our band experience, when we were finishing up that show in Davis, California.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you guys all recall. And we had some ups and downs in the band The Chop, but that night we had played pretty much to the best of our ability. We kind of all knew on stage that we had done a pretty good job. Maybe we still sucked, but for us, we were doing well. But someone came up to that stage and they slapped a bar napkin down right at my feet, right as we were finishing the last song. And as I looked down, as we were finishing the last chorus of the last song, the bar napkin had written on it, "Dear band, you suck."
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
And I just remember smiling. We kept that napkin for a long time because we all really liked it. Now, I think that if
Well, depending on how your night went, right? You had a great night, so you smiled. If you had had a bad night and they'd written that on that, you probably would put your foot through their teeth. Let's be honest.
Right, exactly. So, yeah, so there's that out there. So I think that's part of the ethos behind this record, and I think that's important. Let's just look at the release dates really quickly, because like I said, things happen fast, and I think this needs to be put in some really quick cultural context. So he records this in January of 1965. It gets released in March of 1965. Keep in mind that his last two records had come out respectively in January of 1964 and August of 1964. So he's already on a pretty fast clip of turning out what many would consider, classic records, or at least classic songs on those records. And then he releases this one in March of 1965, and by August of 1965, he's released the follow-up, Highway 61, which has the aforementioned Like a Rolling Stone on it. So these things are rolling out really quickly. I mentioned the Beatles earlier in the call. Dylan and the Beatles had met just a little earlier this year, or maybe right around the time this was recorded. It might have been between the recording and the release. But just to give you a sense, and supposedly Dylan introduced them to drugs and marijuana and kind of sent them in a little bit of more of a druggy direction. Conversely, Dylan was also influenced by the Beatles, but just so we're clear, Help hadn't even come out yet when this was being recorded and released. Help wouldn't come out until August of 1965. So this is still very Beatlemania Beatles, right? So there was not, like, the 60s as we, I think of them had not happened yet. There was no Jimi Hendrix yet. There was no post-India trippy Beatles. It was all pretty straight ahead. And so breaking convention, there was a lot of conventions to be broken, is the point of my story.
That's a good mile marker. Good mile marker for me to kind of think about timelines.
Definitely.
Oh, you put it in the Beatles, and I'm honing in on it. So,
and I liked the context that I sort of got while listening to it and then doing the research on it, that the first time that he ever did any other instrumentation, because it still sounds like a guy who's just used to doing like a straight ahead one take an acoustic guitar, but he just threw a bunch of other people in there. There's not overdubs. It's not like taking advantage of the studio situation with electric instrumentation.
It's taking advantage of it a little bit. I agree with you, Tom. I'm not pushing back, but you do get a true stereo mix on some of these songs, right? Which is anathema to what came out right before this, like Another Side of Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Is like every song on that record like just one man, one guitar.
I agree. They were close mic and stuff. It wasn't like they were doing the wall
Sure.
of sound, one mic in a room thing, but it still didn't sound like he could have taken more advantage of it. But also the compressed timeline maybe made that impossible. I was trying to calculate in my head the amount of hours that they spent recording in the studio for this, and it's like 10 or 11 hours or something like that. It's really a short amount of time.
Yeah.
Sounds like it.
It was made in 3 days, and unlike, I think it was the style at the time. I sound like Grandpa Simpson. It wasn't for budget constraints. Dylan was doing well with his record label at that point. He could have spent more time if he wanted to, but this has always been kind of his ethos. So yes, I think he was getting used to playing with other people, and so you have this extremely loose, couple takes only. People haven't rehearsed; they didn't rehearse at all, which I think comes through, and people are just trying to keep up with the darn song. But it was purposeful. One of the things I found was interesting. So he's working with this producer whose name is Tom Wilson. He had worked with him for the last couple records too. But around this time, they were purposely thinking in this slightly experimental way of like, how do we add electric instrumentation to acoustic stuff? And some of the early experiments that they did, based on what this guy Tom Wilson wanted to do, were just trying to overdub a band on acoustic tunes that had already been recorded, right? But they didn't really like the results of that. Interestingly, that approach ended up working just great for a later tune that Tom Wilson produced, which was The Sounds of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. That is literally just a Simon and Garfunkel tune that then later a band played on top of, and it became a big hit.
Well, one thing that I did not know and sort of very recently learned just through looking at his picture on Wikipedia, Tom Wilson was a black dude. And you talk about what the context of America was at the time. There was a possibility they could have used the same bathroom. Maybe that was more of a radical statement than I think a lot of people in the modern day times would give it credit for, to be working with a guy that is a black dude
Well, especially if you're in a touring band. That shit is gonna change state to state.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, fair enough. Well, and
Dave Brubeck famously in the early 60s was refused. They wouldn't let some of his musicians into the venues, and he refused to play those spots. So yeah, you're right, Phil.
Yeah.
Early to mid 60s, they're getting close, shut out of venues, I'm sure.
Apparently, don't the Beatles deserve a lot of credit for that? They refused to play segregated venues when they toured the U.S., and so a lot of the places were desegregated for the first time so that the Beatles could play there. And then after that, it was like, well, the place didn't burn down, so maybe we should not
made
be
twice
gigantic
the money,
pieces of shit.
right?
yeah. I think there was just also an inflection point in the music business with the Beatles. We were right in smack in the middle of Beatlemania. The Beatles showed up in America in 1964, right, and went on this tour. And I think it just redefined a lot of. Not only did it open the gate for the British invasion and a lot of bands like the Beatles to come through, and Bob Dylan himself mentioned that he was very influenced by listening to I Want to Hold Your Hand and going oh, that's the cool stuff you can do when you pair with other musicians. I want to explore that more. I don't want to be in this box anymore. This is really interesting. But certainly the culture changed too about how much show promoters could make, how much record producers could make, how many records they could sell. All that stuff. But I agree to have a black man in the producer's role in particular, because there's a lot of the band that plays on this record is also African American, but particularly the producer role is an interesting one that shows something. Yeah,
he's the boss, right? Yeah, the producer's like the boss in the studio,
which makes me question the boss on some of these decisions. Then, right? So you said it was deliberately unrehearsed. I get it. You want a live vibe. I know jazz does that at times, but you would at least give your guys a chart, or at least say, hey, we're going to sit on this chord for 8 bars or 4 bars. It is very obvious that Dylan might be facing them in the studio, and they're watching his hands and trying to react to how he decided to sing the song that take, which to me, you could, with a minute or two of refining and maybe writing it down on a piece of paper, you could have a tighter song.
before we dive into just ripping this apart, and I love this record, but I'm still gonna rip it apart for fun. There's a really interesting timeline piece still that we haven't touched on, which is like what's happening in Woodstock, New York from 1965 to 1970, right? So Dylan records this record not in Woodstock, but is basically retreating to Woodstock after this record. That's where, I don't want to say he's living there, I don't know that for a fact, but he's spending time in Woodstock with the band. This is where they currently live from like 65 to 68 or so. And then that will dovetail directly into the All Things Must Pass era, where George Harrison and Eric Clapton and all the members of the band sort of pivot over to working on that project. So records that are recorded in Woodstock, New York in remote studios include The Band, or All Things Must Pass, much of, I believe, Blonde on Blonde. Is Blonde on Blonde the one right after this? Or is it Highway 61?
Well, so what happened in pretty quick succession is he released this record. He immediately he didn't tour. He went back into the studio and recorded Highway 61 almost like very shortly after. So very similar process, similar time frame. Then is when he goes on tour. They make that tour film of him that we mentioned on the Bell and Sebastian episode, Don't Look Back. And then he comes back from that and he gets in a really bad motorcycle accident. And at that, plus him just being, I think, sick of fame and people asking him questions, like Tom had already mentioned, this idea that they have to read into every lyric. What is this about? What is this about? He, from the beginning of his career, as far as I can tell, has absolutely abhorred those kinds of questions, just thinks they're so dumb and gives journalists nonstop shit about them. And so he basically retired from public life. That's when he goes to Woodstock, basically living side by side with the band, and all those great other things happen. I agree.
By the way, that retirement from public life is still in existence, basically, right? You don't see pictures of like Bob Dylan out at on the town in Manhattan having dinner.
No.
He seems like he's a total recluse.
He's not like hitting bars with Beck after the Grammys.
Yeah, it's not like, oh look, here's Bob Dylan on courtside at the Lakers hanging out with Jack Nicholson.
He is a famous crab for sure.
Yeah.
And he's, as far as I can tell, it's been consistent. So one more thing we got to say, because it gets lost real easily in the mix. I'm sure you looked up the date of this man's birth, but when he is recording this album, he is 23 years old, which just seems insane based on what's on the tape to me. And even the stuff he's talking about, which means when he's writing and recording songs like Blowin' in the Wind, this is such old man vibes, everything about the songwriting in a very positive way, in my opinion. But he's such a young guy. I think he's always been like that. I watched the Don't Look Back tour documentary this week, and he gives a lot of shit and he doesn't give a lot of answers. To your point though, it has lasted all the way up until he's now 80. He recently received, and is the first musician ever to receive, the Nobel Prize for Literature. And when you do that, they invite you to Sweden,
Stockholm. Yeah, Stockholm.
Yeah, it must be Stockholm, to give a speech, to take your reward, and he declined to show up. He submitted a speech in writing, which they printed, where he rambles on about literature for a while, but he did not. He's like, no, I'm not showing up to that. So he is truly a recluse. I agree.
I gotta say, we talked before about like, could you have a beer with this guy? But he seems like he'd be pretty fucking insufferable to hang out with. I gotta say, genius, lyrical genius, but I can't imagine that he'd ever just be like, oh, that's a beautiful sunset. You know, I can't imagine that coming out of Bob Dylan's mouth. I think he'd be like, oh, the pollution that the fucking capitalist pigs are putting out there.
I think we'd be okay.
Actually, I disagree. I've come around on that one. I used to think, oh, this is not a guy I want to have a beer with. He seems like a dick. But I no longer think he's like a dick. I think now, after watching more of this footage of him, getting a little more of his vibe down, I read his memoir and stuff. What I do think, I think he would blow you. If you tried to talk about music or his music with him, he would blow you off immediately. He would be a dick to you. But if you were, I think he just wants to relate on a very, I think he'd be cryptic no matter what, but I don't necessarily think he would be impolite to you in any way, shape, or form. And I just think that's maybe a subtle distinction.
Well, yeah, if we're talking about my level for wanting to have a beer with somebody is they have to be openly hostile to me for me to not want to do it, then sure, he probably would not be openly hostile, but I don't think I would enjoy myself during that time.
I'm just saying. You mentioned like he was going to be ranting and raving about some cause. I don't really see that happening either. Although the songs, because I think he feels like the
So what
songs
you're saying is he's not Bono.
Bono seems like a dick too.
Totally.
I think the vibe is 100% different. I think that Bob Dylan's take, of course I don't know him personally, so I'm speculating, but I think he feels like the songs have said everything he wants to say. So he doesn't have a ton to say. That's how he feels. And so the songs sometimes feel like he's sermonizing. I understand why people might dislike that to a certain extent. And sometimes they're just his random thoughts collected. The word salad that you mentioned, Tom, and they're not really to be looked into much deeper than that, or interpret them as you will, because that's the point of impressionist writing and poetry and painting even, is you're just supposed to interpret it from your perspective. That's the whole point of it, right? Not to be explained.
Sure.
You know, Rob, when you mentioned the timing of the release of this record, I thought you were going to say something else. I'm excited that this is the first time I get to drop this on the podcast. But this was released on March 22nd, which 28 years later would be the date of the greatest Fish show of all time, 3/22/93 Sacramento. So if you guys haven't checked that out, that is an absolute ripper.
Totally relevant.
Yeah. So, just 3/22/93fish.net. You're welcome.
Yeah, irrelevant, but also it's not an invalid point. That is a great show. Before we start getting into specific songs, I want to make one more general comment about this album, which is that I mentioned it earlier. He's sort of in the beginning phases of incorporating electric instrumentation and other people into his music, and for me, I think that it lost some sense of sincerity. And maybe it is just the way that it is presented in some of those earlier ones, just him and naked and an acoustic guitar. They came off as more sincere. And I liked the songs, but I don't think that they had the same level of maybe emotional weight or seeming sincerity as the other ones did. We can explore that as we go through some of the individual songs that we're going to talk about, but that was one of my general impressions.
See, I think of him as having just a couple different modes that he's in, but I don't really associate him with some sincerity overall. I do think he's actually goofier. I understand he's not always goofy, but it's interesting because that's just not a word I would have associated with him. Okay, so as we alluded to, it was a 3-day recording process. It's considered a half electric, half acoustic album, with approximately the first half of the record, literally the first side of the record, being with an electric band, and the second half acoustic. They don't. That rule breaks a couple times, as you'll see, but that's approximately what was going on. And through those 3 days, we talked about the band being unrehearsed. Bob Dylan was unrehearsed. And this was not a new feature for him. He continued this way indefinitely, as far as I can tell, which is to say that all his stuff is in sketch form, kind of at all times. So when he shows up at the recording studio, it's this is a photograph of what's on my mind at this moment. He changes phrasing, he changes lyrics, he changes when a chord change might hit or if a chord change might hit. The songs, the way they're structured, they're extremely simply structured, as I'm sure you noticed. Very few chords, very few changes, things like that. But I think that's done in a very purposeful way so that he can stay really loose with just this. I think everything's always been a little bit stream of consciousness.
Rob, I'm really glad you said that because everybody on this call has been in a band with me. And I think that just validates that I've always been right and you guys are just missing the changes.
Nope. I'm going to relate it back to the Bell and Sebastian episode. It comes from a guy who's just used to having the freedom of playing by himself. And it doesn't matter when you make that chord change. It doesn't matter if you extend a line too long. If you're the only one who has to know when the change is coming, then, listen, if you were doing your own stuff, Phil, I'd say, yeah. Put the changes wherever the hell you want. Yeah.
Phil's memoir is going to be, no, you're missing the changes. Yeah. a Phil memoir.
Yeah. That's good. That's really good.
I just am trying to convey that this was not at all pre-planned. The acoustic electric thing. They showed up. Yeah,
obvious.
They showed up at the studio. He didn't know how he wanted the songs to be, and they just figured out the best. They did multiple takes of each song, and when I say multiple takes, I'm not referring to the same approach to the song more than once. I'm referring to different tempos, different instrumentation, just all kinds of different stuff, right? And this just seems to be how he works. I've heard about him working on through the 70s, and he continued to work with other human beings, to your point, but he continued to maintain that level of, well, I'm the only important human being in the room. So I think you can fault him for that to a certain extent, but that's his style and it seems to work, right? So let's maybe we should talk about the individual tunes. We played a snippet of the opening track, Subterranean Homesick Blues. Let's drop back in.
Shocked at how short this song was. When I actually
Does feel much longer.
went back in and looked at it, I was like, this song is so short compared to what I thought it was. And then I was trying to figure out why, and I think that it is words per second. I think that I did a count of words per second of this, and It's All Right Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, just to see which one would be the worst. This is 2.3 words per second in the song.
Damn.
It's a lot of fucking
There's
words per second.
harmonica solos, air quote solos on this song too. So like, that's
Oh, there's harmonica in every song. Don't worry. I made sure to capture that wasn't at all annoying by track 13.
But I like, this song is action packed. I really do think it's great. I think there's a lot of really cool anthemic lines. This is one of those songs that is really fun to try to memorize the words to, kind of like It's the End of the World as We Know It, that REM song. It's like, it's just fun to know the words, and like it's a challenge to get them out while you're sort of listening and driving and like trying to sing along to the song. I think it's a really great song. I think that
I love this song. Tom, I love this song. And what I love about, and there's other Dylan songs that sort of do this for me, but they like simulate a flow state. Like they simulate that state of mind where like you're working hard on something and you lose time and but you're both in it and you're sort of like just like above it, right? And this song I think does that for me, where it's just like it's coming at me so fast that I am sort of just, I don't even know what the words are, but I'm totally like just lost in the feeling of it. And I love it. I also love the early stereo mix. I think this is a very, very professional approximation of where stereo recording and mixing would land on what people would say is, oh yeah, that sounds good. If you listen to music from 1965 to 1970, they were willing to try insanely radical things with stereo mixing. And this sounds more like music that came out in the 70s, 80s, 90s in that way.
100%. This does not sound like a 1965 recording terms of the studio approach and the technique. I would give that to you. I think when I made the comment earlier,
so he
about,
made a good
like,
choice in his producer.
He made a good choice in his producer. Absolutely. Yeah, we talked about this on the Rage Against the Machine album. I believe, Rob, you made the comment of it's a practice of throwing out semi-anthemic statements and just seeing what sticks. And it seems like this song is very much like that. But it works. A lot of them stick.
I think he has some great lines in this. Yeah, Adam, you want to comment?
I only caught one line out of, the 400 or whatever it was. It was the weatherman to know which way the wind blows. That was the only one that stuck out in my head just as he rambled through them. It's a good track one. I'll give you that, right? Like it's upbeat. It at least caught my attention. So
What's that?
we have already talked about all the
face
other
full
things.
of black soot, talking that the heat put plant in the bed's butt. Like, yeah, it's fucking great. It's really good.
I think it's excellent, and it really made a big impression on me when I was young. I got to this record real early in my record listening career. It was one of my first breaks from just buying what was on MTV at the time, listening to my parents' record collection. And this one in particular, I memorized all these lyrics when I was 14 or 13.
I'm picturing you, by the way, Rob. I'm picturing the transition between you just like listening to Dr. Feelgood, and you're like, let me pop on some Bob.
Jump. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and I think I've always thought one of Bob Dylan's great tricks. Well, first of all, I think he's a subtle master of rhyme. I don't think his rhymes are subtle. I think his rhymes are really obvious, almost like from a rhyming dictionary in your face, but he somehow makes it work a lot of the time. And he does use some interline rhyme stuff, and that's where the rap comment maybe came from. But the other thing I think he does is he throws a lot at the wall, and then he lands, like he lulls you into complacency with silliness sometimes, and then he lands a haymaker. And it knocks you out, like with something, with profundity. I don't necessarily think this is the absolute best version of that example of that, but I think he does that kind of thing a lot, and I think he gets off some really good lines here. The one that always sticks with me is 20 years of schooling and they put you on the day shift. That feels relevant today to me.
True.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. Pretty solid line. All right, I'll give you that.
But I think it's just a badass electric blues, and listen, we can get right into the harmonica playing. Dylan is not a great harmonica player. I don't have any problem admitting
Don't tell him that.
But I don't think he's a bad but I don't think he's a bad harmonica player. Just like I don't think he's at all a bad singer. I actually think
Are there
harmonica,
bad harmonica players, though?
The question is, are there
Isn't it you
good
just-
harmonica players?
Yeah, you're right. All right.
Listen,
Maybe
Stevie
that's a
Wonder
separate-
is the best harmonica
Set
player
aside-
in the
Hold
world,
on.
but still.
I think the chromatic harmonica is a totally different instrument than the non-chromatic
You are
harmonica.
correct. Yes.
So
All right,
set
okay,
Stevie
yeah.
Wonder aside for a moment. But this is definitely a style, and I understand why that style is jarring. He's just blowing into it. And keep in mind, he's not using his hands, right? It's just on a little holder.
Sure.
A Darth Vader holder in front of his face. So he is a little limited. I think he uses it a little too much, but I have to say here, I think it has perfect little interstitial between the verse action to it. And I don't inherently have a problem with it.
It does fill the space nicely, and if you flash like way forward to a record like it's called Mozambique, right? The one with ISIS.
No, Desire.
Desire. My bad.
That's-
Mozambique
that's
is
the
also
one.
on that record.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah,
That's
Desire,
about my favorite
Desire
one
crushes
currently.
me. But if you jump forward to a record like Desire, you'll see that like they reach a place where he'll have like a violin, and there'll be an interplay between the harmonica and violin, where it'll actually like blur the line sometimes. You'll ask yourself, like, what am I even listening to right now? So like it does go somewhere long term. So I do think he is listening to himself, like with an open mind on that issue.
Okay, so here's the grandiose point I want to make is that Bob Dylan is a great artist because he is constantly trying to move forward in the context of himself. He kind of remains the steady point, his own expression, and he's true to himself, meaning harmonica stays in the game and acoustic guitar kind of stays in the mix for his entire career. But he's someone who is constantly striving for the next thing. By the time that he was known as this protest songwriter, he was already past that. He was like, I don't want to be known that way. Don't put me in a box, baby. I'm moving on. Oh, you're mad at my change? All right, I'm on to the next change already. He kept refreshing the people he played with. He kept refreshing and trying different styles of music. He even tried different singing styles. He keeps moving forward. And I think you have to give people credit for
I'm
that.
gonna throw
singing
Adam a
styles.
bone
Sorry.
on this one. He also sometimes likes to refresh the lyrics and just do the song again, like on Maggie's Farm, where he just writes a completely different melody and lyrics in the same song, Subterranean Homesick Blues, and puts it as
Yes,
track 3
you
on
can
this
just put-
record, which also is a good song. So I mean, I don't know if I like love this or hate this, but I mean, if you jump from 1 minute of Subterranean Homesick Blues to 1 minute of Maggie's Farm, like
It's the
on
same.
fly,
Yeah.
But that is a very tried and true approach to old school rock and roll. Chuck Berry's songs all are exactly the same. For
Same
instance.
key. Yeah. I mean, it's all 12-bar blues. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll give you that.
So
Blues in
I
B flat, right?
Right.
It's not
I
about the
think it's a-
chords, Phil. It's about the message, man.
I think it's a valid criticism for sure, but I also think Bob Dylan would shrug his shoulders and go, "Yeah, okay," and moving on. Like he's turning out songs at such a fast clip, he clearly does not care. One more thing before we move on from Subterranean is I wanted to mention the guitar player, this guy Bruce Langhorne. I'm gonna give you a little of this guy's history, and then I want you to click a link that I'm gonna send you. So this guy was a teenage gangbanger who, most likely, hearsay, stabbed a guy, then got sent off to live in Mexico for a couple years. He blew off a couple fingers on his right hand with a firecracker. This is the guy playing guitar. Now, take that picture I just put in your head, and now click on his Wikipedia link and check out the photo. Is that what you were expecting?
Oh, wow. No, but you can definitely see the fingers that he blew off there in that
No, he
picture.
looks like a very kind, gentle guy. I
Oh,
feel
wow.
like I would expect this guy to be like to
You're running
run
a
success-
hotel in the Caribbean.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
he's
would have
sort of
said
in
a
a pose
successful
with a-
food truck.
He's like, yeah, you need a kombucha mother? I got a few kombucha mothers if you need one.
Right. In the picture we're referring to, he's sort of mid-dance with a large tambourine.
Yeah.
He just looks like a happy chap. Anyway, I think the guitar playing is actually pretty cool here, but you can definitely tell that you can tell they're trying to keep up with him. I'm glad you mentioned Maggie's Farm. We didn't put it on the focus list. I was tempted to put that as my low point partly because I think that song is so overrated, and even Rage Against the Machine, aforementioned Rage Against the Machine, covered it on their covers album. I don't get why that's a gambling Bob Dylan. He's trying to be clever. I actually think he does get off some clever lines, so I've come to like this version of Dylan to a certain extent. But I think this is very easy to make fun of. What are your guys' thoughts?
This song sucks. Why is it so long? Why? That's my first note on the song. Why is the song so long? Why? It's terrible. When people, all right, we've talked about this with several other artists. people who hate Bob Dylan thinks that all Bob Dylan sounds like this. And
I
if
agree
all
with that
Bob Dylan
statement.
sounded like this, I would hate Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
This even has the false start, right? This even has the like wacky Bob Dylan, like he just burns 25 seconds
got
on
it
fucking
wrong.
up.
All right.
Took
right.
too many amphetamines today. You know, like
There was a description of this song on Wikipedia. They've got, some quick little analyses of the songs. This was, whoever wrote it kind of sums up the way I feel about this album, in that attributing way more importance than it actually deserves. This song can be best read as a highly sardonic, nonlinear, historical dreamscape parallel cataloging of the discovery, creation, and merits or lack thereof of the United States. Get lost. I don't come on, man.
Yeah, that's some serious
if you
bullshit.
take that mindset on every song, like, oh well, this is actually represents. I don't know.
well,
Just
it's
rubbed
like,
me the wrong
we
way.
talked about it on the Green Day episode, right? Like what was American? What was that called?
American Idiot.
American Idiot.
Yeah, American Idiot. If you go out of your way to give Billy Joe every possible, turn, if you just
Best
give him credit
read,
for
right.
everything, right? You read past everything, it's a much better record, right? But
I
you take him
personally-
at sort
listen.
of face value, it's okay.
I think personally on this song, when he says, I ordered some Suzette, I said, could you please make that crepe? He was referring to the tragedy of the genocide of the Native Americans. Clearly, guys.
Duh.
I think that line is wryly funny, by the way. I like that line.
that line is so dumb.
I think,
No,
I
dog.
think he's.
No, dog. That's about the French Revolution, followed by the War of 1812, and we should be working.
But okay, but here's what I
I
want
don't
to
even
say.
know what
No,
I'm talking about. I know nothing about history.
I agree with you guys. It smacks of the English teacher in high school reading too much symbolism. Oh, Holden Caulfield's sister is called Phoebe because Phoebe is the goddess of the moon and she's a hunter and she's hunting. It's like, shut up. Like, James Salinger didn't mean any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Right? I read this article sometime back where someone, I think it was back in the 60s, had written a letter to all these famous alive authors at the time. Obviously, they were alive if they were writing to them, and asked them about this question of, hey, did you put symbolism of the type we just mentioned into your books, or do you think that's a real thing that authors implant? And he got some varied answers, but across the board, people were like, no, I purposely left it. I just wrote what I wrote. I wrote what I felt like writing, and it's your job to interpret it however you want. Don't leave me out of it, basically. And I guarantee you Bob Dylan would say the same thing. I guarantee it. So I think he would agree with you that this is a little ridiculous. And in fact, I think sometimes he's being overly ridiculous. I'm not exactly defending the song, but he's being overly ridiculous on tracks like this to play against that wise sage persona that he had for so long, where people were just adoring of him. He didn't literally have his own. He's not the Beatles, but people are definitely crying outside his hotel room, like hoping to catch a glimpse of him around this time. And it's definitely affecting his psyche in a strange way. Let's put it that way. My favorite complaint about this record, though, is it's extremely cacophonous. There's literally two guitar solos going simultaneously right when the record starts. One pan left and one pan right. And they definitely haven't been listening to each other.
There's no crossbleed in those monitors. They're definitely just going
Yeah,
to town.
like in all seriousness, in a very serious way. Let's check it up. So it's called "Shape of Jazz to Come." So "Shape of Jazz to Come" came out in 1959. This is a huge influence on Jerry Garcia and the whole West Coast movement as far as improv goes. "Shape of Jazz to Come" is at times completely unlistenable because it is literally two bands. There's a song on the record that is literally two bands playing at the same time, one in mono hard band left, the other in mono hard band right. It's insane, but there is something about that had a huge influence on the creators that would follow, because that record comes up over and over and over again. So I do think there's maybe something about just what's hip, especially him being a dude who's probably moving to New York City from Duluth.
Minnesota.
Where did he come from?
He
Yeah,
wished he
an
came
even
from
smaller
Duluth.
town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Some of this is just about taking chances for chances' sake and figuring out what's even possible in these very early days of the recording
I would
industry.
say chances for chances' sake, I would say there's something happening culturally that's allowing Bob Dylan to think that these are de-risked choices. These are lower risk choices than they appear to be, right?
I don't get that.
You want me to talk about Shape of Jazz That's Come again?
Right. I thought we were talking about that fish show still. Never mind.
322.93 Sacramento,
sorry.
dog. Don't miss it. Don't sleep on that.
I liked when he said, I went into a cab, I went out the other door, this Englishman said fab. I thought that was cute.
That's a good line. The one about the funeral parlor and the guy giving him his card and said, call me if they die. That was kind of fun. But overall, it felt like a Whose Line Is It Anyway bit that went on for way too long. You remember they would line up in a row and all have to like continue the song and they'd pass it to each other. It felt very much like that. Yeah.
It's really interesting because you guys clearly experience lyrics in a very different way than me. Like you're taking on a sort of like linear experience is what you're describing to me.
Okay.
Where like you're listening to the song like it's a linear story, whereas like I almost feel like I'm watching like a screen flash images, and I'm just like my emotions are just changing randomly based on these little snippets that are like casting these totally random images into my mind. I sense no story.
I kind of know what you mean, and I think that's actually I think that's a lot of this songwriting style is meant for that. I think Bob
60
Dylan
vignettes all at once. Kind of a thing.
We're transitioning into Bob Dylan's version of impressionistic poetic songwriting, where he's just trying to paint this very broad picture. So I relate to that to a certain extent. For the record, I actually like this song. I'm a huge Bob Dylan fan. I love this record, but I understand why this is bad. Also, you know what I mean? That's where I'm coming from. I think he gets off a lot of funny lines in there, but it's a little clever for clever's sake. Goes on too long, and it's definitely cacophonous. So I certainly don't think I wouldn't put it on the top 25 mix to try to convince you to like Bob Dylan or anything like that. Okay, moving right along to side 2. Mr. Tambourine Man.
We're going to slow things down a little bit for all the couples out there.
It's not really the acoustic side, but I guess the band steps away. Right?
The band was out smoking, and he quickly crammed in 4 songs.
Yeah, the people got up close to really boo for this one.
Right.
'Cause that electric guitar just trashed it.
Speaking of poetic, impressionistic songwriting, this is, to my mind, and you shall not convince me otherwise, and if you say otherwise, I hate you, and we're done. This is great. This is brilliant. It's painfully beautiful. It's evocative. If you don't agree, you haven't paid enough attention. This song gives me chills. It's excellent.
This was one of the only ones that had a substantial melody that stuck out to me. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like a lot of everything prior to this was very much just, hang on the same note, or maybe you're just going 3 notes in a row, kind of that blues shuffle thing. This was the first one that stood out as, a melody that's going to stick with me. So I did take that.
Are you saying the first one or the only one? Because
the first one that stuck out to me. So yeah, maybe first one that stuck out to me as, I could latch onto a melody, but it wasn't until whatever this is, 8 songs in.
I've always really, really liked the melody for Gates of Eden. I think that's a great melody, and he kind of does like like there's a lot of melodic movement in that song. I will say the electric side has less of that than.
Well, they're all blues changes, I think, is
right.
what we can agree to, right? The first side is all blues changes, so there's not that there's less melodic opportunity there, but he sticks pretty close to the obvious choices melodically there.
For Tambourine Man, I have always Bob Dylan, he likes his abstractions in his lyrics, right? There's a lot of abstractions in his lyrics. Sometimes it gets so abstract that you lose any kind of narrative thread to it, and it kind of takes away from its poignancy, but I think he really nailed it on this one. And you're right, Rob. It does seem poignant, and it puts me in a mindset. I can picture some of these things happening here. I give a lot of credit also to Bruce Langhorne for his guitar work on this one. I think it's really subtle. I think it's really good. I think it actually helps to move the song along.
I agree with that.
If you're not paying attention to it, you might think it's like chimes or like
almost a piano at times.
Like
yeah,
right. It's pretty subtle.
Yeah, it's very subtle.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
The thing about this song that I find interesting, and I just think it needs to be said, and it needs to also be said as just like part of the Bob Dylan story, really, is like, for me, it's not that I don't want to say anything to disparage the song. It's beautiful. For me, it sounds like the version that the songwriter passed to the Byrds that then they recorded the proper version of. Like, I'm more of like a production guy, right? Like, I'm more of a Steely Dan guy, right? So, like, in a way, like, this is beautiful and haunting in a way that to me is made more beautiful by the fact that I think of the Byrds version.
You have
as the
something to
version.
compare it against.
Yeah,
right?
and like I don't think of the Dylan version on Bringing It All Back Home as the definitive version of the song. It feels like a B-cut or a cover in the same way that
this really benefits from the haunting stripped down version that's here. But I think Dylan would agree with you, because I did read an interview with him where he mentioned Jimi Hendrix's version of All Along the Watchtower, and I totally agreed with you. He's like, oh yeah, clearly that's way better than what I did. It was his. It was always his. Clearly I was writing it for him to do that. Awesome. Like, moving on.
yeah, way to go, Jimmy. Right? Like, yeah.
Well, and he is the creator of a lot of great source material. We talked about this, I think, on the Prince episode, partly because he is so fecund and he's like constantly writing, constantly moving on to the next thing, and not necessarily pausing to like hyper develop the idea into what its potential could be, which is one of the reasons why he is the guy that has given so many artists their number one.
Years ago, I read Bob Dylan's One, and he said that there was a period where him and Joan Baez were living together. You know, like they were romantically entangled, and he said he was trying to write no less than 3 songs a day, as was Joan Baez. And whatever year like 63 and 64, whatever years.
This would have been around this. This would have been around this time, actually. Yeah.
He said he was writing 1,000 songs a year. That's why many of the songs sounded the same. He said he had no problem with writing songs to the same like sort of cadence or rhythm or chord pattern. He said him and Joan Baez are trading songs. He said, like, if I released 60 songs that year, like I wrote 1,000, and so did Joan, right? Like, so.
Yeah.
He's with Joan Baez in the Don't Look Back documentary, which documents him going to the UK on tour at the end of the summer in 1965. So a few months after this came out. And Joan Baez is with him on the tour, and they're hanging out constantly. So I think they were still romantically involved. But there's like scenes where they're just in the hotel room late at night. He's smoking a cigarette on a typewriter, typing.
Yeah, cracking away a typewriter.
And she's just playing a song, and they're just like collaborating that way. It's very interesting.
He in the book he talked about like the his memories are just like the smell of coffee and cigarettes and the clacking of typewriters. Like that's his memory of like that time. Like in his life, and I was like,
by all accounts, to do that, you have to be writing constantly. There's another scene in that same film where he's just writing in the cab between the shows, or whatever. Like, he's just constantly like, oh, that's a line, let me write that down. Oh, that's a line, let me write that down.
So
the discipline of that.
No, totally. I completely agree with you, and I think like just to take a second to talk about what it takes to be this great, and just because I've brought up 32293 several times now. I know that there was a period where Trey was doing the same thing. He talked in that era, peak Fish. He was talking about getting off stage, going to the back room, and having the dude who was his handler for the night would give him a tape of the night set and a list of the songs they actually played that night, no matter what the set list was, the songs they'd actually played that night, the songs they had played the night before, and the songs they had played the last time they were in the city they had gone to. And he said he would start writing the set list immediately. He would go onto the bus, listen to the show, and start formulating the set list for the next show immediately. I was like, that's
discipline.
Insane.
Yeah,
it's
all right.
Insane.
Yeah, I'll give
that. That's just what it takes, right?
Yeah. Well, to throw it to the world of professional sports, which we're all very familiar with.
Very.
I got into basketball recently over the pandemic, but people, like all the teammates for Steph Curry, will talk about how he will get done playing a full game of basketball, that he is just giving it his all. He's on his bike the whole time, just running. And he gets done, and he goes into the locker room and puts a 35-pound plate on his back and starts doing push-ups.
Jesus.
Like right after the game. It's just, that's what it takes to be the best.
You got to go past the max, dude.
Yeah.
You got to go to failure,
Yeah. So, talking about going past the max, great segue opportunity there, Phil. This song should have ended when that harmonica kicked in at 3:25. There should have been a fade on that harmonica right there. It's too long of a song. What is it? It's 5 minutes and 30 seconds long. The last verse of the song is objectively the worst verse of the song. And there's a harmonica solo that comes in at like 325.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's one more verse, and it's not a good verse. And then there's more harmonica, and it ends. They should have just ended it on that original harmonica solo right there, cut it down to about a 4-minute song.
And
It
they
would
do
have been
plenty
perfection.
of that real quick fade off. Where like everybody's still going, all right, we're done here. And it kind of drains off. They could have done that there on the harmonica.
Wait. I agree the harmonica is a little, could have been left off the track. But are you saying the last verse is the worst verse?
That is my indication.
This is the "To dance beneath the diamond sky with one hand waving free, silhouetted
Yes.
by the sea" verse.
Yes,
That's the
I don't
best
like that
verse.
verse. That's not the best verse. That's not the best.
Let me
verse.
forget about today until tomorrow. That is clearly the best verse. You're 100% wrong.
I will stand by the fact that I'm not 100% wrong.
I think you're just trying to stir shit up with that opinion.
I'm not trying to stir
I know
shit up.
you are.
I don't like that last verse. I think that is one of the more trite sentiments. The rest of the song is really good. It's got a lot to compete with. You're telling me that the lines that
You're telling me yes to dance beneath the diamond sky with one hand waving free is a trite sentiment?
yeah, I am.
That doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, you're right. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay. All right. Let's move right along to "It's All
60s.
Wrong."
What?
100% wrong. This is dropping truth for 6.5 minutes. This cuts. This is amazing. This blew 14-year-old Rob's mind.
There are
for sure.
lyrics on here? Hang on, let me see what's on. Again, which is
there's some really anthemic lines
probably
on this
what-
song.
What are you talking about? This is the most stripped down version where he's intending you to listen to just the lyrics. In fact, you said, and I went and checked, Adam, you said that there's harmonica on every track. Now, that is technically true, but on this track, there's
just a
barely a
little
whiff of
but
harmonica.
there's
It's just a little
still,
bump
because
right
I
at the
remember
beginning.
going through and thinking like, oh, I can't make the comment that there's harmonica on every. I found it. There's one moment
He
on
gives
here.
it-
He sneezes into it, or he coughs into it, like in
He
between
does.
verses.
There's one breath at like 140, and then again at 320. But it's like he immediately thinks
Right.
better
No,
of it. It's like he can't help himself. He's like, no,
You
Bob.
gotta
You said you weren't going
Pump
to do
the
this.
brakes.
It was just like muscle memory. Just like went for it after he was done the verse. He was like, oh no, shoot. Yeah. This song's great. I really did. Some of my favorite
It's
Dylan
excellent.
lines are in this song, personally.
Agreed. I actually can't believe you think this is trite slam poetry, Adam. That's just a wrong
Well,
opinion.
like I said, I'm not a lyrics guy, man. I try my best to be, but I'm not as English driven as you find English. What were your degrees in again?
We had such high literary hopes for you.
There you go.
Jeez.
I know. See, I'm listening for stereo mixes and guitars and tuning.
Dude, you don't listen to this as like a one take and just be like, that's just an impressive one take from a mechanic standpoint, that you could get all of those words out, not stumble over them in one take. That's impressive. Just the standpoint of
Where did this
raw
fall
effort
on
it
the
must
album?
take.
Because this was probably at the point where I started getting tired. I was just like, oh, okay.
Second to last
Okay, that's
song.
probably why I was a little tired. Didn't necessarily examine
I mean,
it.
it is 7 minutes and 30 seconds long.
So I think that if I could lodge a complaint, it would be that this has more of a foot in Dylan's past than his future. This sounds a lot more to me like Masters of War, which is another excellent Dylan track.
That's got to
But he
be a
gets
metal
off so
song,
many
right?
Good lines.
That's got to be a metal song, right? Dylan goes metal early on.
I mean, the sentiment is quite metal.
I don't
would
know
say.
that tune. Sorry.
Oh, yeah?
What's that?
You do. It was on a Pearl Jam tape I circulated heavily.
Oh,
in high
okay.
school.
All right.
What's that line at the end where he's like, and I hope that you die, your death will come soon. And he said, I'll stand over your grave till I'm sure that you're dead. Like, it's like the last line of the
intense.
song. It's
It's
intense.
intense.
It's really intense.
I remember being like 12 or 13 and getting a Pearl Jam tape that had a cover of that on there, maybe like, fuck, that's way harder than I even knew people could be.
Yeah.
I'm so weak.
But okay,
Need to
but
toughen
back to It's All Right, Mom, Only Bleeding. I really think this actually is maybe my favorite track on the record. And this whole record kind of is what made me want to be a songwriter, I have to say. So I'm coming at it from that personal angle. But it also made me realize how daunting the task of being a songwriter was. He gets off so many good lines in this. For them that think death's honesty won't fall upon them naturally, life sometimes must get lonely. The way he uses rhyme in this, I feel like on paper you would think it wouldn't work. You're like, how are you rhyming it so many times? It seems cheesy at a point. But no, it works. For them that must obey authority, that they do not respect in any degree, who despise their jobs, their destinies, speak jealously of them that are free, do what they do just to be nothing more than something they invest in. Crazy. Blowing my mind, Bill.
I do agree. I am really into this Bob Dylan, dare I say Eminem-esque, like intense slant rhyme. I think it's great. It doesn't bother me at all. This song totally does it for. I give Adam the like it. It's hard to stay with it the whole time.
But
it's long.
to put the
There's
context on it, like I just growing up when music hit me hard. This is not what inspired me. And it's just different, areas of your brain, fire off when you get, Rob, in your case, you got some cool rhymes, some cool lyrics, those fired. This did nothing for me when I was, in high school. Still doesn't.
For you, Adam, I think, what does Adam like from music? Adam likes vocal harmony. That's my number one thing that I think Adam likes. Adam likes vocal harmony. This is an anti-vocal harmony album. There's vocal harmony on Dylan stuff later, and some great vocal harmony on later Dylan stuff. You know
what else? I don't think there's any Hammond organ.
Well, that's it.
Maybe
throw it out the window.
Maybe on track.
That's the problem.
Other than that.
Yeah,
that's the problem. Well, yeah, but there are many things I understand what you're saying, and I understand that I have a personal connection to that, and that's fine. I don't expect you to care about it in the same way I do ever. But there are certain pieces of art that are worth taking the time to appreciate in this life, even if they go a little bit against our natural inclinations. And I think this type of stuff, or at least Bob Dylan's songwriting career, is one such thing. I certainly am arguing for that.
One of the things I really appreciated about the deep dive this week, because I had listened to this album many times before and very much enjoyed it many times before, with this song in particular, which I've also listened to independent of the album a bunch of times, it took me so damn long, like literally until this week, to realize that on this song, he rhymes the last line of the chorus with the last line of the verse that he had just said. I don't know why that never occurred to me. You feel to moan, but unlike before, you discover that you just be one more person crying. So don't fear if you hear a foreign sound in your ear. It's all right, Ma, I'm only sighing. Because they're so far connected in time, and they seem so disconnected, I never caught that that's where he was rhyming that from. And I don't know why I never caught that, but I was like, oh, another level of appreciation for the song. Because I felt like I was always so annoyed in my early listening of the song that he never actually used the line, "It's all right, Ma, I'm only bleeding," which is a great damn line. He just never used it in the song. I'm like, why did you write a line that great and then not actually use it in the song? And I was like, oh, it's because there's some rhyme and or reason to why he is choosing those end lines of the choruses.
So I'm glad you said two quick callbacks. It is an interesting point, Tom. Two quick callbacks before we move on. One, I'm glad you mentioned Eminem, because I wrote down this is a little like a rap battle. He's just throwing stars. And speaking of things that Adam likes in music, chord changes. This is literally a one chord song. You didn't think it was possible.
He did it.
It's got a bit of a shuffle. I think you could argue that he temporarily hits the four chords.
He does do,
many times.
Yeah.
I mean, well, it's. I don't want to split this hair with you, Rob.
It's a lot of E minor. That's my point. It's a heck of a lot of E minor. And also, Bob Dylan he's a huge fan of the no bridge necessary school of songwriting, which I get how that could rub you the wrong way also. But who needs a bridge, guys?
Honestly, when you have that many good lines in the song, you don't really need a bridge. I got no complaints about this song. And normally I'm the guy who bitches about how long songs are and says, oh, you should edit it. Well, this one, no, I dig it, because it's got that intensity, that sort of like unrelentingness to it, that like when you're done, you're sort of like, which I imagine must have been how he felt when he got done take one. And he's like, I didn't fuck that up the entire time. This is a usable take. Well, I thought this was going to take forever to get down.
I will absolutely give you that. Yes. That would, I can't imagine the size of his sheet music holder and how many pages he had going on. So yes, Tom, your point earlier about
I think the answer
mechanics.
Is non-existent in zero, by the way.
He's just
no sheet music holder. He's just
sorry, I meant lyrics.
Rambling.
You don't need sheet music for this.
Let's roll it on to the last tune on our focus list, and also the last tune on this record. weird minimal arrangement choices, which is his acoustic guitar and bass.
There's bass?
And I don't know if you guys happen to...
Really?
Yes.
It sounds like electric guitar, right?
It sounds like a fretted acoustic bass,
Yeah,
to me, which is a bizarre instrument in and of itself.
William Lee. William E. Lee.
Spike Lee's dad.
Is that
Get
Spike Lee's dad?
out.
Oh, wow.
It is?
I was William E. Lee. Okay, also black. I thought, like, you throw in the E. Lee for anybody's last name, and I'm like, well, your family was real racist, apparently. Like,
No, that was another reason I thought was interesting. That Spike Lee's dad plays bass on this record, and he's kind of highlighted here.
hell yeah. I did not know that. Good for him. So wait, you're telling me that Spike Lee was not some hard scrabble self-made guy? Everybody's got an in.
No, I think you see a lot of people, and you could even say this about Dylan himself, that people got a little annoyed with him. When he first came to New York, he was trying the Woody Guthrie approach to his own history, which is he was trying to look like a tramp who just hopped on a boxcar and showed up without a dime in his pocket. But in fact, he was from a middle-class Jewish family, as I mentioned, from Minnesota. But, I think a lot of performers like to obscure their past that way, and maybe Spike Lee is no exception. I don't know. He is the guy that's with Jack Nicholson at the game, by the way, right?
Yeah, totally.
Wrong
yeah.
game, but, other team. But
He, not Spike Lee, Bob Dylan has a fascination with writing about vagabonds and starving artists and that sort of bohemian ideal of, what does he say, the empty-handed painter from the street is drawing empty patterns on your or it's drawing something patterns on your sheets. Like, it comes up so often in his songs, this sort of down on his luck but artistic genius, unappreciated, unmoneyed artistic genius, that I have to imagine that he's somewhat fantasized about that as an ideal that maybe he was trying to achieve.
Sure, but I also get the impression that it really admires the songwriting tradition generally. I think that's definitely where he feels like he came from, studying folk songs, studying the songs of Woody Guthrie, of Hank Williams, of people like that, and really just like learning American traditional music really thoroughly and then wanting to add to that. So I think it's a little bit of both things. Well, so the other reason is we have gone out of our way to not interpret any of these tunes. And this one, too, Dylan would never tell you what this is officially about. I'm sure there are many interpretations of it, but I've always read it as being about him and about his previous career as an acoustic-only performer. He himself has blue eyes. I think the song is directed at him or at his fans and saying, it's done. Here's a line from the song, leave your stepping stones behind. There's something that calls for you. Forget the dead you've left. They will not follow you. The vagabond who's rapping at your door is standing in the clothes that you once wore. Strike another match and go start anew. It's all over now, baby blue. He's breaking away from, the people that made him famous and maybe even a little rich. And I think that's what this song's about. Just an interpretation, though.
That's a good interpretation. I can see that. I think this song is beautiful. I really do like this song a lot.
There's something about this song, as well as a few songs on this record. This is a bit of a non sequitur, but I see the direct threads to later Dylan tunes that crush me, such as Tangled Up in Blue and Simple Twist of Fate. There's something about the minimalist arrangement that he's experimenting with. There's something about the meter and the timbre of the overall, and just the vibe of the song. It's in this very bittersweet fantasy world, and he just lives there so effortlessly, right? Like, it's just, that's the thing about Dylan that really just, he exists so effortlessly in this alternate world.
I think Adam's I could tell he put no effort into it. That's the look on your face that I'm getting from you right now, Adam. I don't agree with it, but that's the look I'm getting from you.
That's definitely incorrect. But since you mentioned Simple Twist of Fate, Phil, it's interesting you mentioned that one, because I had noted before, I'm pretty sure that is another example of a song that's just acoustic guitar and bass. And I remember always thinking it's 10 years later in Dylan's career and sort of a different phase of his career. But I always remember thinking that was an interesting arrangement choice. On that record, the band kind of comes in slowly, almost like the Stop Making Sense film, where pieces get added. But but at that point in the record, it's just acoustic guitar and bass. And here's a little Delaware fun fact for you guys. Tangled Up in Blue, or sorry, Blood on the Tracks, that record 10 years on from this, is considered his great divorce album. The woman he was divorcing, his first wife, is from Wilmington, Delaware.
Get out.
Probably a lot of these songs are written about her. Yeah, Jacob's mom.
All right.
She's still alive?
I believe so, yeah.
She's live in Wilmington?
I don't know.
I mean,
I'm
if
sure
you
she
have
can.
money,
She's
probably
too
not.
long ago, dog. I would've-
I hit the lottery. I'm moving to Wilmington.
So I feel like I went through phases with my Dylan listening where, for a long time, Blood on the Tracks was my favorite Dylan album. I never liked Nashville Skyline. That's the one where he's trying to do a different voice, and it just never did it for me. I like some of the earlier stuff. I definitely like Highway 61 Revisited, but I'm in like a John Wesley Harding and Desire phase of my Dylan listening right now, and I've kind of been on that kick for a while. I really like John Wesley Harding. Came out 2 years after this one, and then I really like Desire, which came out 10 years or 11 years after this album came out, and they sound so different from each other, and I think they even sound different from this album. Not to get too high on how great Bob Dylan is, but like there's a lot in his catalog to appreciate. He's got a lot of albums, like not the Willie Nelson style, but yeah.
Yeah, he's got like 60 records or something. It seems like that many anyway. And he even has some late period great stuff. He put out that great record in the late 90s, Time Out of Mind. That was pretty legit. But yeah, he definitely has these different phases. So I mean, I think that's one of the reasons he's considered great, like we said, is that he's constantly moving forward. The through line is him, his voice, which I know a lot of people like to make fun of. And actually, one of the things I noticed about this track, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, is this is probably the easiest place, in my opinion, to make fun of Dylan's voice on this record, or at least on this focus list. Although, for the record, I don't think he reaches peak Bob Dylan SNL impression until Blonde on Blonde 2 records later. But, he sounds a little goofy at times.
Blonde on Blonde's pretty good, but I agree that when people are making fun of Bob Dylan, they're thinking of Blonde on Blonde.
Can we give me a little credit for not saying anything about his voice on this episode? I really think I took a lot of restraint, and I think I need some props for that.
Did you put like a Post-it like right on the
I
screen?
did. It's right on the screen right here. It says, "Don't be a dick about his voice."
No Dylan impressions.
Right. And I made sure I didn't do any of those either.
In all seriousness, Adam, like obviously he makes some odd choices with the way he relaxes or fails to relax his sinuses and the overtones those create, right? But he is in time, he is in tune. It's just like he wants to annoy you.
I don't
or
think he's a
something,
super
right?
emotive singer. I think you have to listen to what he says, not necessarily
Okay.
how he says it, right? Like the human voice. Like a
that's a great way.
violin,
That's a great-
like a note can make you cry. You add vibrato to it, the tone, the timbre. If you're just getting the lyrics out,
That's
so,
great concrete
yeah.
feedback.
It's my one contribution this episode.
Also, again, bear in mind that he is, by all accounts, like chain smoking, probably unfiltered cigarettes.
He's still
entire
alive,
time.
by the way. 81
and has
years
been
old.
4
I think.
years.
Yeah.
4 years. So,
And yet he's 23. All that put together really boggles my mind.
yeah.
How could a 23-year-old have this voice? Okay, I think we've rounded out our commentary on the songs. Let's throw it around the horn. Is Bob Dylan's Bringing It All Back Home a must-listen before you die? Tom, I'll throw it to you.
All right, I'm just going to list off the songs on this album that I don't like. I don't particularly like Outlaw Blues. I don't like Bob Dylan's 15th Dream. End of fucking list. Listen to this album. This is a great album.
This is a yes for me as well. I think this is the type of record that makes a professor of music's, history of rock and roll list. I think this, as well as some subsequent Dylan records over the next 4 or 5 years, maybe 10 years, since I love Desire so much, are just must listens. Note to self, I am actually going to look up which other Bob Dylan records made the list, because I feel like, might want to, rile myself up after this one.
All right. So that's a yes from me. Is that a yes from you too, Phil? You got that one? You got a yes from you on there?
That's an
All right,
affirmative.
All right.
Adam, would you like your naysaying logged officially?
So growing up, I think my dad had 2 Dylan albums. One was Freewheelin', and the other one was I guess it was Highway 61 or whatever. I listened to those. To my point earlier, nothing really caught me. In 1999, he came to the Bob Carpenter Center, which is the small-ish stadium at the University of Delaware.
I went to that show.
Of course, I had to go see Bob Dylan, right? It's like once-in-a-lifetime thing. So I go. It was completely unimpressive. I just didn't. I don't know if I was expecting more, but it was just what I assumed it was going to be.
By the way, the Bob Carpenter Center
There
holds
you go.
5,000 people. So you saw Dylan with 5,000, fewer than 5,000 people, I'm sure.
I went to that show too, by the way.
There you go. And you were probably blown away. It just didn't do anything for me. So I think this gets down to the different strokes for different folks, right? I didn't like this week. I don't necessarily like Bob Dylan, but you have to listen to this because you find out what you do and what you don't like.
Oh.
So I will not be listening to this again.
Twists and
But,
turns.
And there you have it.
I'll just implore you one last time to put these vegetables into your diet somehow, some way. If you need to go through a greatest hits comp or whatever, or get one of us to make you the most palatable Bob Dylan songs.
What's the fun in
mix.
palatable, though?
Find your way. Find your way to appreciating some Bob Dylan and start from there, because the dude won a Nobel Prize, and I think it was
Oh my God, we have to hear about that Nobel Prize every time Dylan is.
Oh yeah, because that doesn't mean anything. Good point. Yeah, it means nothing. Yeah, because you're a nihilist, and who cares? Such an asshole.
Sorry, you can go on.
I was also at that show, and I remember thinking the band kicked, and it was awesome. I think I'm thinking of the same show at the Bob, but you couldn't hear a GD word he was saying. His voice is so shot, I think, from about 1990 on, that you could not discern one single syllable, other than the fact that I already knew the songs and I knew the lyrics, so I kind of sensed what he was saying, but you couldn't discern them on your own. But yes, of course, I think it's obvious. I'm going to say yes. I think this is a must listen. I think it's a transitional moment in not only Bob Dylan's career, but it's a transitional moment in what's happening with music. I think this is another one of those records that a lot of future tastemakers listen to. I think the Beatles absolutely, I know the Beatles absolutely admired and loved Dylan and listened to records like this, and go listen to You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. That's John Lennon trying to be Bob Dylan. Stuff like that, right? Not to mention the whole songwriting tradition through the 60s from there. Guys like Jimi Hendrix covering his songs, or the Grateful Dead being influenced by him, or various other songwriters throughout the years. So I think this is an important and pivotal moment in an important artist's catalog. You should absolutely listen to it. If you're one of those people, if you happen to still be listening and you're one of those people who thinks Bob Dylan's voice is the problem, no, you're the problem.
I can't give a boost yet. Sorry. How about a boom?
Okay. Bobby, you're on the list, buddy, for the first time out of 7. You made it past the goalie this once. We'll see if you make it on the next go round.
You know what? Maybe with the exception of Elvis Costello, Bob Dylan might be the person who would give the least amount of fucks about the fact that he made our list.
Very true.
I do not care at all.
It's true. Man didn't show up for Stockholm.
Yeah, good point, Ralph. Yeah.
I got time for that. Okay.
Actually, I changed my vote. Fuck Bob Dylan. No.
We're having an awards ceremony, Bob. You can come by Wilmington. We'll give you a plaque.
All right. I believe all that remains is to pick what we're going to be listening to next week. I'll throw it over to Tom for that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sticking around with us, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed yourself as much as I have for this spirited discussion. I have the Albinator 5000 here. It is primed, prepped, ready to go. Let's spin that wheel and see what our homework assignment will be. So next week we will be listening to, drum roll please. Oh yeah, D'Angelo's Brown Sugar.
It's a departure.
Definitely. Yeah.
There will be significantly less lyrics on that record.
And a bit more bass, I'm assuming.
Protest song after protest song after protest song. Buddy Woody's protesting is, oh, why won't you make sweet enough love to me?
Nice.
Okay, well, now we have our homework. Excited about that. Excited to dive into a new record. We hope you've enjoyed this installment of 1001 Album Complaints. If we enjoy what we're doing, shoot us over an email at 1001albumcomplaints@gmail. Let us know where we're wrong, where we're right, who's wrong, who's right. Specific call-outs are most welcome, honestly, listeners. We really...
By name, timestamps, all that stuff.
I have a filter on the Gmail address to make sure that we call out times when Adam is wrong, so that'll really rise to the top of our list.
Yes!
Okay, but it's been lovely chatting with you all for 1001 Album Complaints. I've been Rob.
I've been Tom.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Adam.
Boosh.